join in because there is some very serious news. And I wanted to ask Gennady, where should we start? It seems to me that people didn't really understand Trump in this case, and he wrote on Truth Social, I'll quote him now, and maybe we should close it for now. Here's what he wrote on Truth Social right after that. A great and very successful day in Alaska. The meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin went very well, as did the late-night phone call with Ukrainian President Zelensky and with various European leaders, including the NATO Secretary General. And here is the main statement that I think we need to discuss. Everyone agreed that the best way to end the terrible war between Russia and Ukraine is to go directly for a peace agreement that could bring the war to an end, not just a ceasefire agreement, which is often broken. In other words, he raised the bar, he set the bar as high as possible. I think that's why these negotiations weren't very, let's say, well, it seems like he didn't achieve any real success. What do you think? How would you comment on this?
In my opinion, the meeting itself fizzled out, especially the ending. The beginning was quite grand. Everything looked beautiful. They talked for 3.5 hours. But after that, Trump simply had nothing to say to the journalists in this situation. He just said that good relations remain. And then he said, I need to talk to European leaders and with Zelensky because from here on, everything depends on Zelensky. Is he ready to accept Russia's terms? If he is, then the war ends. So that's the crux of it. Do we want to end the war? Yes. Are we now forced, in order to stop the war, to make some concessions, right? Well, this is the proposal that needs to be brought to Zelensky, because right now I'm watching how European leaders are reacting to Trump's calls. I think there's a general meeting scheduled for tomorrow as well. They'll be talking via video call. Macron will join in from some military base, and there will be people from Finland too. And now the topic has come up. They're starting to push the issue of security guarantees. So yes, maybe we'll meet Putin's conditions, but the conditions he's setting, he's not backing down from them. And to some extent, he probably still got Trump's brains in the sense that he says, well, the official Russian language, the church should not persecute Russians, and Donbass with the freezing of the conflict along the dividing line. They have now started to peddle this all the time, and one person must give consent. This is Zelensky. In other words, they are basically putting the responsibility for agreeing to this kind of peace deal on Zelensky, literally within 2 or 3 weeks. They say, we can all meet together if we resolve this issue. So you come and sign, or you resign and don't sign, and someone else will sign instead.
I see. Well, there were also some symbolic moments like that. First of all, the meeting in Alaska took place on Trump's territory. Second point, the B-2, that plane, flew right over Putin's head. Just think about how precisely you have to calculate for that plane to arrive at that exact moment. I think that was also planned out. There must be some kind of intelligence right on Putin's plane to know when to launch. That's another thing.
And then they sing about the invisible one too.
Yeah, then Trump's red carpet goes wide straight to the podium, while Putin's is off to the side. Really narrow. So, in my opinion, he showed who's boss.
Well, it depends on how you look at it. He showed who's boss. But we can see that Trump started getting hate inside America. They say the soldiers shouldn't have rolled out the carpet either. And really, he shouldn't have been received like that at all. And in general, he didn't agree on anything. And basically, he humiliated himself. I listened to Schwarzenegger. He made a direct address to Trump. You're our president, and you're standing there humiliating yourself, asking for an autograph from this killer, and so on and so on. But it seems to me that right now Trump is acting like a wise man who has made such decisions and is moving toward a difficult peace, an unpleasant peace for America. A lot of resources and money have been spent. And of course, to make concessions to a dictator, even in small things, is disgusting to people. But since the war has been going on for 3.5 years now, killing an unimaginable number of people on both sides, this is where the wisdom of a person, a father, a grandfather who cares about the whole world comes into play. And that's why he says, enough already. What are we going to prove tomorrow? Well, they'll get a bit fatter here. They'll seize more territory. We can't give Ukraine 5th-generation weapons right now. They just wouldn't be able to handle them, or 6th generation for that matter. We can't send Tomahawks in there. We just can't. We can't. Basically, there are a lot of things we can't do. We've tied our own hands with these international obligations, and now we're forced to stick to them. And that's why I think he did the right thing by informing the European leaders, kind of bringing them into the group so they can put pressure on Zelensky. And I'm sure they understand him. Yes, you can still make more demands. You can add little things here and there. But I think Europe is also now interested in ending this war because, as they say, cheap gas is still sweet.
But what does the geopolitical situation look like right now? Against Trump, you have China, you have Putin, you have socialist Europe, and you have the Social Democratic Party, which he is successfully destroying here step by step. And of course, there's so much hate. The thing is, Ukraine can't seem to figure out that in this case, it needs Trump's support not to hate on him because he's basically the only person actually taking these steps. And besides that, I think it's quite possible that Putin also brought along some compromising documents on the Democratic Party and all those organizations, which will help him now sort out the situation with these criminal cases, including money transfers, kickbacks, and so on. Basically, this process is just getting started. What do you think?
Zelensky is under unprecedented pressure to move toward peace. On one hand, Putin is putting on the pressure, ramping up the military, bombing peaceful cities, and still moving troops forward, making some small advances. On the other hand, we see that the American side has stepped up its reports to the department. The first report is about systematic human rights violations in Ukraine, people being imprisoned, Ukrainian citizens being sanctioned, and so on, persecution of priests, bloggers, journalists, and the elimination of political opponents. That was one report that came out. Next, there was a report stating that 25% of the sample the Americans checked involved suspicious payments. So, in fact, 25% of the incoming funds were stolen. We can imagine how much money Zelensky's circle has simply stolen from the citizens of Ukraine. That's why I think Zelensky will face unprecedented pressure from the Trump administration to move toward peace. Because in Ukraine, no matter how much we want the territories to be liberated or for Putin to disappear, what Ukraine really needs is peace. At the very least, to get back on their feet.
So it turns out Zelensky is now flying to America. He actually doesn't even know what will be proposed.
He does know. He knows perfectly well because everything is being announced in parallel, leaked to the press, stated by Trump himself and by Putin. We're listening to the primary source. Trump says, peace can be achieved quickly, within 2 or 3 weeks, if Zelensky agrees to surrender Donbass. What's unclear about that? But that's what Trump says. He talked to Putin. You and I didn't. Trump talked. That was the demand. Next, we listen to Putin. He says, eliminate conflict causes. That means putting NATO aside. The Europeans say to put NATO aside. There will be no security guarantees from NATO. That's what Macron says. And then what? And then Putin continues, official status for the Russian language and no persecution of priests. What's unclear about that for Zelensky? Of course, you can play dumb and pretend. Oh, I didn't get what you were talking about. What did you say? Oh, I didn't hear that. I don't know. He discusses this day and night. He talks about it with European leaders. He feels how the support from the Europeans has weakened. In that sense, their rhetoric has changed too. Just the day before yesterday, they were saying that first there should be a ceasefire and then negotiations. Putin says, damn, first Minsk, second Minsk, third Minsk, seventh Minsk. Now what, you want to trick me again? Basically, he doesn't give them a chance. He probably explained to Trump, what guarantees do I have? Well, let's say we stop the fighting. They didn't agree. No, let's do it this way. Let's end the war. That's a great prize for you, Mr. President. An excellent prize. You've ended the war. You're sitting at the head of this table, and Zelensky and I are signing an agreement of this kind. I think it's about 95% agreed upon. And we're talking about Donbass, about the language, which could still be discussed, maybe not as a state language, but as an official one, and about the church. Stop imprisoning priests.
So Zelensky has two options. If he signs, he'll probably be out by the end of the year. If he doesn't sign, I think Trump will keep pushing, and maybe the issue will be resolved in a month.
Yeah, I can imagine if he signs and comes back to Ukraine and gives up Donbass, basically ordering a retreat, leaving behind those fortified positions our troops have secured. How will the troops react to that? And what about his political opponents? They'll hate him more than people hate Trump. There'll be hate in the streets there. And then look, once peace is made, that means no more mobilization. The army will have to be downsized. Since peace is made, the peace agreement will also include issues like non-proliferation of nuclear weapons, ballistic missiles, and medium-range missiles, and those will be removed from Ukraine. So there's another aspect built in here, a contract army, by the way, which Zelensky himself mentioned, saying that in 2026, and Zelensky said, we will build a contract army. A contract army means no more than 150,000 people, but right now it's 900,000. Well, there you have it. A new prospect is taking shape. And you're right, if he signs it, I don't know how he's going to talk about it. He probably should come and say, I'm resigning and I'll do everything that
would be ideal for him. I don't know. Obviously, he's surrounded by his inner circle, plus there are the globalists hanging over him and so on. And he has obligations. So he's not an independent figure in this situation. And don't you see that this brevity, both in Putin's and Trump's speeches, was intentional, and they didn't give any information to the journalists either? That's so as not to spread any information at all. And besides, they even met on a military base. I think that's a place where information simply can't leak out.
Yeah, right. Invite 100 journalists into a room for pizza, all of them broadcasting live on their phones, shouting questions at Putin and throwing hate. No, the goal here was to bring things to a certain point. Trump realized that Putin wasn't going to make any concessions. There's nothing that can be done there, like a ceasefire. That was probably rejected right away. But in return, Putin made what I think was a better offer. That offer was basically, let's just make peace altogether. Well, if we've agreed to give up Donbass, then let's just make peace. But first, let's make peace and you give up Donbass. But how can you present that to an American audience, or any audience for that matter? So Trump comes out and says, well, we made a deal here without Zelensky. That's just impossible. They could have come to an agreement. But Trump kept saying, I need to call Zelensky, I need to call the European leaders, our allies. And right after all this, he would call them one by one. Now, here's an interesting angle to consider. If Zelensky doesn't sign, if he refuses to sign, what kind of country will he be returning to? Because Putin's offensive will continue, and it might even intensify. And as some experts say, the Ukrainian forces are facing serious problems with their personnel.
Yeah, but that's
chaos.
It's basically a dead-end situation. But it turns out that Trump has basically disrupted all the globalists' expectations because meeting with Putin on American soil, someone who's considered a terrorist, a bandit, and who has practically waged war on other countries. Well, in doing so, he's still trying to find a way out of any situation to stop.
Listen, the Americans worked with Stalin. They helped rebuild the Soviet Union, built factories, power plants, supplied tanks, armed Stalin, almost fully armed him during the war. They set up Lend-Lease for him. Well, it's nothing new for them. If they need to at least partially pull Russia's resources away from China, because in reality, this war has given Putin or China the chance to take practically all the resources of the Russian Federation. That is, Europe refused. America isn't buying, so where do they go? India and China, well, we sell them there. So isolation didn't work out. So then what the hell is the point of continuing this when, after all, Russia is a military country that wants to fight, wants to extract resources, so let them sell to us cheaply too. We can even extract them ourselves. So this is an interesting puzzle, which in the United States is always solved pragmatically in favor of money. Are we actually going to profit from this or lose out? In war, we definitely lose everything. Sure, you can use it for training to pump up the military-industrial complex, but that's already been done. So next, let's trade, restore the asset-base balance.
By the way, with the creation of this American-Ukrainian fund, I think it's a good opportunity to refill the coffers at the expense of the bureaucrats who stole that money. I think it won't be hard to track where everything went, and in this way, Ukraine will definitely get some help.
Well, in any case, that's the pill that can help sweeten the bitter outcome of this war. The loss of lives, the seizure of territories, reconciliation in areas where we definitely didn't want it, and, of course, political concessions. I also think there's still a change to the Constitution hanging over us, including possibly removing the commitment to join NATO from the Constitution.
Of course, I think a lot will need to be changed in the Socialist Constitution because what's written there, in the American Constitution, it's written correctly that all your rights are given to you by God, but here some structure gives them to you, the state promises you something. That's already absurd in its very essence.
Well, we're also products of the Soviet system, but we all depend on the state. We are cogs in the big machinery of the state, interchangeable or disposable. You can do whatever you want with them. Essentially, Zelensky has kind of revived this closed Soviet Union with its draconian methods and even added martial law on top of it. But this needs to stop, this mistreatment of citizens. Yeah, it really does. So Zelensky faces a very tough choice between a bad option and a really bad one, at least for him personally. I think Ukraine doesn't really interest Zelensky that much, nor do the people. What matters most to him is how he looks in the eyes of the public, whether he still seems powerful or not. Is he a Bonaparte or not a Bonaparte? And in this situation, of course, the Bonaparte's crown is crumbling under the weight of corruption scandals, which the United States has already hung on him with the help of their anti-corruption agencies. They've shown him who really holds power in Ukraine. The street, the anti-corruption agencies, which are again backed by the same United States, who aren't even participants in the conflict. It's truly amazing, the twists life throws at us. Turns out this is Biden's war, not America's. So it wasn't America helping Ukraine, but Biden personally, what, out of his own pocket? Or maybe from the State Department, or with the help of the CIA or the Pentagon? Or was it that Congress didn't allocate huge sums of money for this? And of course, when Trump now claims that this is his war and that he'll end all wars, it feels like a slap in the face to Ukraine. So, excuse me, you used Ukraine, battered it, and didn't achieve any success. That means your strategic goals were set with the wrong priorities. What kind of advisors did Biden have? What kind of advisors did the European leaders have? Why did they decide they would win this war by crushing Putin with sanctions? You see, that's an expert miscalculation and a colossal one at that. But the ones who have really suffered here are, of course, the people of Ukraine and Ukraine itself.
Ukraine fell under Soros's influence and the influence of the Democrats 30 years ago, basically becoming a vassal. And this constant change of presidents couldn't lead to anything good, because on one side you had the KGB, and on the other, the socialists. And in the last 20 years, Europe has basically fallen into socialism and, in this case, Islamism. That's why we're calling for closer ties with America. And honestly, Trump wants to solve the issue. But the fact that everything has gotten so deep, that everything has turned out so wrong, all of that needs to be undone. That's why there are so many problems here.
By the way, Trump actually has a good outlook for the future. So you're not really holding on to this issue right now. Things turned out the way they did. Well, with all the slowness. And if you look to the future, together as allies, we can revive your economy and make Ukraine a showcase for the United States of America, even for Russia itself. That's probably how he sees it. And it's actually beneficial for Ukraine to stop the war and become a showcase, or to continue the war, and in that case, it's really only disadvantageous for Zelensky.
Any war is always an explosion of these thalassocrats, these bureaucrats who grow in number, tighten human rights, and so on. And Trump, if he stops wars, he understands that he is basically destroying the internal political structure of every country that was preparing for war or got involved in one. In other words, it causes internal destabilization. I'm sure that right now Russia and the European Union are basically competing to see who will collapse or fall apart first. Because for them, peace is a disaster in this situation.
In this case, these are people who have no approval rating. Stoller has an approval rating of about 20% in the UK. Macron has 20% support. None of them have any ratings. They're just passing figures. Tomorrow they'll be gone. They'll be out, replaced by someone else. We can see how often Europe's leaders change. So, it's not really right to focus on individuals right now. We should focus on stable structures, on cooperation. The EU legal framework needs to be finalized. Can Ukraine join the EU with Zelensky? Absolutely not. Because the concept of Yermak and the concept of the Five Cats clique are simply incompatible with European values. We can see how they treat their own citizens when it comes to human rights. And God forbid we lose an ally like the United States of America, an economic ally, not even a military one. Moreover, if they are also considering some kind of guarantees together with the states, similar to participating if there is an attack. And there's one more thing. Putin also said that he wants to adopt some law or written commitments never to attack Ukraine or Europe again, provided that Ukraine fulfills its own obligations. That kind of cooperation could be possible.
It just turned out that Putin was so afraid of NATO, and now he's getting Trump or Trump's people right on his borders. Especially with this corridor between Azerbaijan and Armenia, which will be controlled by the United States. It's possible that such a line of demarcation will also.
Putin wasn't afraid of NATO. Since 2005, Putin has always been afraid of one thing.
His very own people. Yes, exactly.